Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Snowflake SQL session. This is SQL Dan with you, and today we are going to look at how to parse out components from a name. So let me show you briefly what the problem is. I have a data set here that's called retail data, and you can see I have a field that is called name, and it obviously contains both first and last name in it. So the challenge that we're going to have here is that we need to split these into separate columns. This is a fairly common challenge that occurs when we exchange data with our business partners. We often don't get it in the format that we'd like it in. So being good at this kind of stuff is always very helpful. Now, if you'd like to play along with this yourself, I should tell you that this data set came from Kaggle. It's called the Retail Transactional Data Set, and I'm happy to put a link to this in the description to this video so that you can go get it and download it yourself. But I've already taken it and I've loaded it into Snowflake, and so we're ready to begin. So the first thing that we need to do before we get going is just to take a look at the values and understand exactly what the challenge is going to be. The records that we've looked at so far seem to just have a first name and a last name, but we need to know, is there anything else in there? For example, are there people that have two last names, or is there any other information? Is there perhaps a middle initial or something along those lines? So just in scanning it, I'm not seeing it, but scanning it in this way is probably not the most efficient way to do it. It's really better to write a couple of data quality queries and really get a look and get a sense for what the whole data set contains. So in the past, I've always attacked problems like this using either string separation functions or regular expressions. But honestly, since I started using the Snowflake split functions, I found that now turns out to be the best way to attack problems like that. So the split function works like this. Instead of selecting star, I'm just going to select, so split, and then the name of the field, and then what the delimiter is. And the delimiter just means what it is that separates the values that we want to split out. And in this case, it's just a space between them. So that's what I'm using, a split, and then I have name and a string that consists of a space. And so when I run this, we'll see that it returns an array, and now I have the component pieces together. Still doesn't answer the question that I want to know, which is, are there only two in every single one of them, or are there more than two? So probably a better function than just the split function would be to use a function called array size and call that on the split. So let me show you what that looks like here. So I'll leave that split there, and then we'll say array size. And array size simply takes any array and it tells you the number of elements that are in that array. So what I'm going to pass into it is this split call itself. Into the array size function, we can see that the function is telling us that we have two in every single one of these. And still, just in scrolling, I'm not seeing any more than that, but I still don't trust that. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead of just doing it this way, we're going to call the array size on every single record in the table and just get a sense for exactly what's there, so we can find some of the records that perhaps are of greater concern for us. So let me put the array size there, and then we'll group by that. So the group by is going to give us all the ones that have two, and if there are any that have a different amount, those would be put together as well. And let's go ahead and collect the record counts while we're at it here. since we're already grouping by. And let's run this, and we can see that. There we go. Okay, so what it looks like is that we have 289,000 of the records have only two components. So obviously the vast majority of them. There are 10,000 that have three, and there's 1,500 that have four, and then there's 382 that are null. So we're probably going to start with the ones that are two, first of all, and then we'll go directly to the ones that contain four and look at those possibilities. And then I imagine that the three is going to have a combination of them. Okay, so with that, we'll keep this up here, and I'm going to copy this rather than retype it. So we're going to paste this down. Okay, and now with the split, I can split it and I get the array, and then I can either say that I would like the first field, which is index 0, or the second field, which is index 1, or a second function called split part. And I've done a whole video on the difference between these two, and I'll link to it here so you can go watch it if you'd like to learn more about that. But essentially, there's nothing that can't be done with split part, or nothing that can be done with split part, I should say, that can't be done with split by itself. But split part just makes it a little easier. So it's going to take the same parameters as the split does. So we have the name field, and then we have the individual field here. Okay, and then it takes a third parameter, which is which part do you want to see? Okay, now before we indexed it and we used 0 for the first record. With split part, it actually uses 1 for the first one. So split part is indexed at 1 and split is indexed at 0. Just a minor thing to keep track of here. But both of these are pulling the same thing, which is, in this case, the first name of all of these people. And then the only other difference is that split returned it as a variant, where split part returned it as a varchar. And again, if you watch the other video on split and split part, I go into that in a little bit more detail. So from here on out, I'm going to stick to split part for the rest of this video here, because that's going to really do what we need it to do here. So we've got select split part, and let's copy it, and let's get the first name and the last name. So we have part 1 and part 2, maybe. There we go. And so this is going to be part 2 right here. Okay, and then we no longer need, actually we need the array size in a where clause, because we want to operate right now only on those records that have two components. Like, as I said, we'll deal with those first, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with the ones that are of other sizes later. So I brought that array size piece down into the where clause, and we're just selecting all the ones where there are exactly two pieces. And so when we do this, we can see that we've effectively split the first name from the last name. Now, if you're very lucky and you don't have any other problems in your data set, this is as far as you need to go. If you just need to split first names from last names and every record only has two components, then you're good to go. Unfortunately, we rarely get that lucky, and there's usually more that we need to do. So I'm going to park this one aside for a couple of minutes, and now let's take a look at the records that contain 4 components, and see if we can get a sense for what's in those. So let me copy the name of this table and the where clause, and let's bring this down. Again, I want to hold on to that one that I have there on line 15. And then let's just do a split on this so we can see all 4 components at the same time. So select, split, and then name, and then the delimiter. And again, we're only selecting those records that have 4 components. Oh, no, at the moment we're selecting those that have 2 components, but now we've made that change. So now we're selecting those records that have 4 components. And let's see if we can get a sense for what these extra fields comprise. Well, as I scan down, it looks like, to me, that I'm seeing the first name in the second field, or the second component, the second element of what's being split out, and I'm seeing the last name in the third element. And then it looks like the first element contains a salutation or honorific, right, like Dr., Mr., Mrs., etc. I don't see any names there, but we'll do a quick query of all the distinct values that are in the first column to double check and make sure that there are no names there. And then it looks like the last column contains graduate degrees, doctorate degrees, actually, or actually down here at the bottom I see there's a junior. There's another junior. There's Mark Parker II. So it looks like the last field could contain a doctor, or it could contain a generational indicator. I don't know if we have any records where there is someone who's a junior and a doctor at the same time, but I guess if that was the case, we'll know that when we check the first column and we check for Dr. and Mr. and Mrs. If we don't have any that have a first name here, then we can assume that there are no people that have 2 different suffixes that we have to program around. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully my logic sounds sound to you. So let's take a look now at the individual pieces, or I'm sorry, the distinct values that can appear in the first column. So I am now going to paste this query down. I'm going to select split part column 1. So let's do that here. And then we're going to group by that. That will get us our distinct values. And I figure it never hurts to collect counts while we're doing it. That's why I typically don't use distinct. I almost always use group by, because I figure if I'm going to get distinct values, I should also just try to see how many I'm dealing with. Okay, as I recall, there were about 1,500 of these records that had 4 different components, and this looks to be in the ballpark of 1,500. Okay, and there are no first names in the first column, so that's really good news, because what that tells us is that we only have these these salutations in the first column, and means the first names are all going to be in the second column, and the last names are all going to be in the third column. And then we're just going to have to do a little bit more work on the fourth column. So I'm happy with that. Let's really quick take a look at the fourth column here. So I'm just going to change this 1 to a 4, keep the query identical, and see exactly what all values appear here. And again, that looks like about 1,500. So we just have the mixture of doctorate letters and generations. So I'm going to grab all of the possible values here. I've highlighted. I'm going to hit Control C, and I am going to paste those up here. Because what I'd like to do is I'd like to split out these 2 different ideas here into separate columns. And so since the list is rather small, I can hard code a list in a case statement and do my separation out that way. Now, if there were like several hundred different choices, then I might have to think long and hard about, a different way to do it. But in this case, with only 9 different choices, I think the fastest way is simply to write a case statement and put them into one group or the other based on the values that are encountered. So I'm putting single quote marks around each one of them because these are going to be strings that are in an in list here in just a second. All right, and let's group them together as well. So junior actually belongs down with the generational number. So Control X to remove junior there, and then we put some space and Control V to put junior back there. Okay, so now I have a list of values that represent my graduate degrees and a list of values that represent the generational characters. So I'm going to build a couple of case statements, and I'm going to say case when, okay, and again, it's when split part, the fourth component from split part is where these are coming from. So I'm going to highlight that, Control C, and say case when split part 4, okay, is in, and then I have the list all ready to go. So it's just a matter now of, I'm going to put them all on one line and comma separate them here, like so, and then we'll put that up inside of the parentheses. Okay, and I'll finish the case statement in just a second. And let's do the same thing now for the other ones. Control C. I'll paste that down. We'll put commas in front of the fourth, the fifth, the third, the junior, and the second. There we go. Okay, and then we just need to put that one there, and then all of those there. Okay, so now I have the beginnings of two case statements that are finding the values that I would like to parse out and separate from the names, but also keep track of these ideas also separately. And so what I'm going to say is that whenever I find one of these values, I'm doing it, so this means I'm doing the graduate degrees, then I'm going to want to keep that. So I have case when, okay, and I can put a then right there, and I can just paste in that split part 4 all over again, and I'm going to type end after that. And I can do the same thing down here on this one, and end afterwards. So we're almost done here, but we basically have logic that splits these up into their various columns. Now, just for kicks, I'm going to copy these up into the query that I was using for counts a minute ago. So we can take those and we can paste those up in here into the prior query that we ran. And so we've got our list of distinct values that appear in the fourth column, and then we have them separated into two different columns as well, just so we can check and see how that logic works, and we can see that this is doing what we want it to do. We've got our graduate degrees in one, and we've got our generational letters in the other. So I'll go ahead and I will assign an alias for that as generation, and this one is as graduate degree. Graduate degree. Okay, so we are nearly there with splitting these up into the various pieces. So we already know that split part 1, okay, was the Mr., Mrs., all that kind of stuff. Okay, and we don't need to do any case statements there because there was only one concept in there. So we can just put a 1 there and say as, and I'm going to call that honorific. Okay, and then we also know that in fields 2 and 3, we have the first name and the last name. So pasting a couple more times here, let's put a comma there. And let's paste down here. Let's get a comma here, and this is going to be field 2. And this is going to be field 3. Okay, and this is first name. And this is last name. Okay, so one more time looking through it. We have it split. There's 4 different fields. We actually split it 5 ways, right? Because those 4s were splitting into 2 different ones. At this point, I don't want to collect counts. I want to look at the individual values. So I'm taking away the group by, and I took away the count. And we're still just operating on those that have 4 elements. So I think that we're ready to go here. Let's run this. And there we go. So for of all the records that had 4 components, we've got it split into first and last name. And we've also captured the other pieces of information that were provided to us. And so we can see that we got the generation one correct. We got the graduate degree ones correct. So I'm thinking that this is looking really good for those records that contain 4. So the next step now is to combine this with those records that contained 2. So we had, if I recall, it was up on line 15, and there it still is. Up on line 15, we had these split into first name and last name. And I'm going to hit Control C, and I'm going to bring that down. And then right here on line 25, we have the ones that are split from 4 ways. And we're going to combine these together using a union statement. And I'll use union all to say that there's no duplicates. Okay, and by combining these 2, we've now got all the records from 2 and all the records with 4 pieces, and we can split them out into first name and last name. Now the only problem that we have here is anytime there's a union, you have to have the same number of fields in one query as you do in the other query. And so you notice in this first query here, we actually have 5 fields because we took the 4 components and we split it 5 ways. In the bottom one, we only have 2 fields because this one doesn't contain all the same detail that the one up above does. So what we need to do is we need to fill in some nulls as placeholders for the things that we don't have in those records that contain only 2. And we want to put them in the same order. So the first field was the honorific. So we're going to put a null here as honorific. Okay, and then we're going to have our split part for the first name, our split part for the last name, and then we have 2 more fields that did not exist from the in those records with only 2 components. So we need 2 more nulls. One for the graduate degree and one for the generation. Okay, so this query will now work and will do what we want it to do. Now, I don't have to go and assign aliases in this second query because anytime you have a union query, whatever the field aliases are for the first query become the aliases for the entire result set. So all I got to do is make sure that they're in the same order. Now I did say as honorific on this one. I didn't have to do that, but I did not specify first name or last name here, nor did I specify graduate degree or generation. We should be good to go on this though and run this. Okay, and so it looks what I got is I got all the records that came from the ones with 4 components first, and I'd like to see some of the other ones as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to order by last name, order by, that's field 3, so that I can see them intermixed Oh, and I forgot I had a semicolon right there, so let's try that again. There we go. So now we're seeing all of the Abbotts coming out first, and now all of these look like they came from the records with 2. I don't see any that have, oh, there was a 4 right there. So there's Miss Shannon Acevedo, MD, and we can see all of the other ones there. So this is doing exactly what we want to do, and we've handled all the 2s and all the 4s. So all we've got left to do now is deal with the 3s. And I'm going to tell you, these are going to be just a little trickier, but we can put to use what we've already learned on the 4s to make this go just a little bit faster as we attack the 3s. And so in order to keep the video from running too long, on the records that have the 3, I'm going to skip a little bit of the data exploration queries that we did on the records that had 2, and especially on the records that have 4. But let me tell you what I discovered. So for the records that have 3, there are some records that in the first field have Mr., Mrs., etc., just like we saw on the records with 4. And on those records, then the first name was in the second component, and the last name was in the last component. There were other records that contained 3 elements that in the third component contained either a doctorate degree or a junior, senior, or whatever. And that means in those cases that since the third field was occupied with the degree stuff or the generational stuff, means the first name is in the first field and the last name is in the second component field. So the 3s are going to be a little trickier because on the other 2 that we've done, we've had all of the first names in the same field, or the same component I should say, and all of the last names in the same component, at least for the group. But for this one here, it's going to be different. So, like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip some of the data exploration because the logic is going to be exactly the same, but just in order to keep this moving, we'll move ahead with that. And so what I'd like to do here is I'd just like to show you some of the records that contain 3. So we'll say Control C. Oh, and we'll keep this query right here because this is the beginning of our production query here on line 25. So we'll come back to that one more time here. And let's just say select star. Okay, from retail data where every size equals 3. So let's see, and instead of select star, I want to select the name. So let's just take a look at this field. And you can see it's as I described to you, right? We have some records with Doctor in front. Here's Scott Sampson with a second on the end. Mr. on the front. Linda Spencer with VM on the end. Maria Patrick on the front. So, again, it's kind of what we saw on the records that had 4, but they only have one or the other. Okay, so there's our starting point for what we're going to do. So I'm going to go up to the prior query, and I'm going to grab those 2 case statements that were separating out the doctors from the generational degrees here. And so that would be these 2. I am going to bring those down and put those here into the query where I've been working with the 3. So we'll keep name here, and we'll paste in those 2 case statements right there. Okay, and now instead of split part 4, we're looking at what's in the third field instead. Okay, so 3, 3, and 3. So let's run this. And we can see here that in those cases where there was a graduate degree, we've got them. In those cases where there was a generation, we've got those. However, there are others that didn't have either one, and so we just have a null on both of them. And that's because in these cases, we have a last name right here, right? So we're not going to deal with those yet. We're going to stick right now to dealing with the records that have either the graduate degree or the generation at the end. And what we know about these is on these records, the first field is the first name, the second field is the last name. Okay, so let's keep this part in place and let's add in fact, I'm going to go grab and copy once again. So I'm going to grab these two split parts, Control C. Okay, and let's bring those down here again. I'm going to paste those in. Okay, and I'm going to say first name, first field, last name, second field. Okay, but this is only true in cases where the third field contains one of these right here. Now, it could be either one, but it has to contain at least one of them. So I'm going to add a where clause here, Control C, and I've got both of those for the moment, and we're going to bring those down below this where clause, paste them in right here, okay, and we are going to paste both lists together as one list. There we go. So, and we don't need it to be a case statement anymore. It can just be an and as a part of our where. So, the where clause now says where the array size is 3 and the third field contains one of these 9 things, because again, we know that those were the generations or the graduate degree, right? So in those cases, we now know that we have a first name and a last name, and then we have the degrees that we split out. So let's run that. And this is bearing out what I said so far. We've got this much of it split out. Okay, I am going to hold on to this one for just a minute because we're going to put this whole thing together soon enough. Okay, and so this query that's on 48 will eventually be joined with the one that we have above that's on 25. Oops, it's not on 48 anymore, is it? Let's put it back. There we go. And let's paste it down here one more time. Okay, now the only thing that I'm going to change about this where clause is instead of saying that split part 3 is in this list, okay, I'm going to say that it's not in this list. Because what we know about the data is that it's either one of these 9 or it's a last name. And in those cases when it's a last name, then there was something else on the front of it right there. So hopefully you're following along here. Again, I'm not going through all the same proving I went through on the other ones because we can build on what we've learned about the data so far. Okay, we also now no longer need these. Actually, yeah, we don't need either one of these. Had to think about that for a second because we still want to pull the honorific out of it, okay? But we don't need to list them out like that. We already know that the first field is going to contain the honorific whenever the last field doesn't contain one of these right here. Okay, so let's see what we've got. We've got split part 1 is honorific. And now this one for first name needs to be changed to the second field. And this one for last name needs to be changed to the third field. So like I said, the first name and the last name are coming from different places when we have 3. But if I run this, okay, this is also doing exactly what we wanted it to do. And so we've successfully parsed out the 3s. There were 2 different groups of them, but we've got them parsed out. and they seem to be behaving the way that we wanted them to behave. So the only steps we have left now are to pad the missing elements. So in this one right here, where the honorific and the name exists, okay, we had no graduate degree, and we have no generation. Okay, so we had two nulls there at the end of the query. In this one up here, where we did have either a generation or a graduate degree, we have nothing in the first position that indicates the honorific. So I need to put a null there on that one. And now we're ready to put all this together. So select null right there, and then there's those pieces. I think that's right. Okay, and let's see, we don't need the name field again. Okay, and let's put a union all between these. Alright, so there's our threes. I guess before I go paste this into the larger query, let's just run the threes one more time. And you know what, that's the same thing that I did last time. Let me sort by last name again as well. So in this case, it's going to be the third field still. That's right. Order by a third field. Okay, because I want to see a mix of both. And right now I'm only seeing the graduation, I'm sorry, the graduate degree and the generation. And since we know that there's, 12,000 of these or 11,000 of these, I don't really want to scroll down through to go find the other ones. So I want to find a way to get a mix. So again, by sorting by last name, we did get a good mix right off the bat here. So this, you can see this is doing exactly what we want to do. And very fortunately, just in the first 6 or 7 records, we've got all the possible combinations. So we get to see it, right? We've got records with no honorific, but a graduate degree. We've got a record with no honorific, but a generation. And we've got records with honorific and nothing at the end. So I'm convinced that this 3 is also doing what I wanted it to do. And so now the last part of this is to take this and paste this up into our other query where we had the 4s and the 2s. So I'm going to say Control C, and I'm going to bring this up. So there it is. That's right. It was on line 25. I'm sorry. So there we go. And it doesn't matter what order I have these in. I have them starting with 4. And since I already specified all of the column aliases on 4, I'm going to leave that at the beginning. But then we have the 2s there, and we have the 3s there. So that's all fantastic. And there we go. There's the other 2 to handle the records with 3 parts. And we're also going to keep the order by last name in here. So hopefully we can see a good mix of records as we run this entire query. And here we go. We saw this before. There's a lot of Abbotts with only 2, but there's one that came from a 3, right? So, and that looks perfect. The graduate degrees are where we want it to be. And let's see what else we can see. It's difficult because there are so many records with only 2 that they kind of swamp the other conditions. And so we have to look a little harder to find them. There's another one that looks like DDS, and there was one with 3 and an honorific, and that still looks great. All right, and again, graduate degree, honorific. I don't remember. Oh, Acevedo was where we saw our first 4, so I have no doubt that it'll still look good when we catch it here. I didn't order by first name, but there we go. Shannon Acevedo, Miss Shannon Acevedo. Okay, so I am going to say that this query is now done, that we have successfully parsed the name field into its components. And, the devil was in the details. It didn't just have a first name and a last name. There was other stuff in it that we had to first discover and then we had to write queries in order to pull it out. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed following along and saw how I kind of worked through the problem and got to a solution. But I'm feeling pretty confident that I've got a good query here that will work on this data set and future data sets that I would get from this source. So that's it for now. This is SQL Dan saying thanks for watching. I hope you'll like the video. And if you really like what I'm doing here, I hope you'll subscribe as well. Or perhaps put something in the comments if you disagree or have something additional to add there, because I do read the comments. And especially if you disagree, I'd love to hear what you have to say, because I'll try to reply to you as well. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.